Our first talk this afternoon is going to be by Celine Beaucamp. Did I do it right? Perfect. It's called Reevaluating a Historic Mining District, the Philipsburg Silver District. So Celine obtained a bachelor degree in earth science and environmental science from the University of Savoie. Did I do that one right? All right, good. France in 2006. She then went to Canada where she received her master's degree with a focus on metallurgy from the University of Quebec in Montreal, Canada in 2010. During grad school, she worked summers as an exploration geologist for Nio Gold in the Timmins Val d'Or Greenstone Belt, and then for Arriva Quebec Uranium along the west coast of the Ungava Bay, Nunavut. From 2010 to 2015, she worked as a production geologist and geotechnical engineer for Barrick at their Cortez Hills site in northeast Nevada. After moving to Montana in 2015, she worked as an adjunct professor for the environmental science and mathematics departments of the University of Montana Western, as a geology of Yellowstone tour guide for Rhodes Scholar, and as the executive director for the Beaverhead Trails Coalition in Dillon, Montana. Wanting to pursue teaching at the university level, she started her PhD studies in the fall of 2020 and is now all complete but her dissertation. Her research focuses on the Philipsburg District, Montana. So, welcome, Celine.
All right, sorry for the long bio with a very non-linear experience. I'm doing my PhD at Montana Tech. Montana Tech just starting a new earth science and engineering PhD program, and I'm in the first batch of guinea pigs starting it. So, but very great program. And so I'm doing my field, my thesis research area on the Philipsburg mining district, which is an old silver mining district. I have control of that. The layout, we're going to talk about, location, the history of the district, what kind of lithologies we're dealing with, and then I'm going to dive into the veins or the lodes because they're actually big enough to be lodes, how they are similar to the Butte mining district, what kind of zonation are in them, and then what the potential of the district is still there because that's, why we're really looking at any district. So we're located in Granite County on the west slope of the Fleet Creek Range, right on the side of the Philipsburg little town. And then you may have recreated in this area because there's a lot of historic ghost towns that are very neat to see. Still a lot of workings there. The Philipsburg Silver District was the second most productive polymetallic district in Montana, right after Butte, as a matter of fact. It was active between 1864, started in the north of the district at the Hope Mine, and then went south as they discovered more and more silver. It eventually ended up all the way at the south of the district in the granite bimetallic, and that's where, if you go visit the ghost town, that's where you're probably going to go. The granite bimetallic was the biggest producer in the whole district, and that peaked in the late 1800s, but they did produce a little bit, especially reworking, dub ore, and the tailings until the 80s. A big manganese production came from that district, especially with World War I, that needed a lot of manganese for steel. And then that ended in the 60s when the African manganese mines kind of took over and it was hard to compete. But here is a pretty impressive pictures. This is a semi-weekly shipment of silver bullion, all of that coming from the granite bimetallic mine. So twice a week they were shipping that. Pretty big. A little bit in numbers, the district produced over, and that's as far as I could find, so that might be more than that, but over 25 million ounces of silver, 36 million kilos of zinc, mostly in sphalerite. And then the other one notable number is the 450,000 tons of manganese dioxide, which was pure enough to be used in batteries with minimum processing. So pretty rare and kind of a one-in-a-kind occurrence in the US at the time. It also has significant tungsten, although that was never really a driver of the production there. So lithologies, compared to Butte, which is, we're in the Boulder Batholith, lithology is pretty simple. The Philipsburg district actually is over the Philipsburg batholith, which is the KGD up there, and all of the sedimentary stratigraphic column on the side. So you can see mines across both lithologies. And so we start all the way down from Precambrian, we have quartzite, then we have the pre-usual strat column from Cambrian, from the Flathead, all the way to the Devonian. I'm not going to read them all, it's going to be boring. But then all the way to the Phosphoria at the north side of the district up there. And then that whole strat column is folded into an anticline that is plunging north. And then it is intruded by the Philipsburg batholith, which is dated at about 75 million years. And if you're familiar with the Butte district, that's also the age of the Boulder batholith. And then it also is intruded by porphyries on the north side of the district, which they've been dated with one date by Frank Dudas. And he dated that at 65 million years. And so if you're also, again, familiar with the Butte district, the porphyry in Butte is also at 65 million years. Moving on to the veins, there are really two main type of veins in the district. The one that were the bigger producer in terms of volume are the steeply dipping quartz veins that were silver and then a bunch of sulfides in it. And those are indiscriminately going into sedimentary and igneous rocks. So they don't stop at the contact. They really just go through that contact without changing any attitude. And then on the north side of the district, mostly because really where the beds are dipping according to that anticline, you start getting some quartz vein along bedding, so not steep at all, really shallow dipping toward the north. And those, though, the particularity is that there's no sulfide. There's really just silver in them. So that's a pretty interesting discrimination between the two veins types there. So I've been talking about similarity to Butte. So let's remind ourselves what Butte is like. So you have the porphyry at the center of the district, and that's where you have the Continental Pit over there and Berkeley Pit there. And then as you step away from that porphyry, you start getting into the veins. The vein system that are proximal have mostly copper and silver. And then you go into the more intermediate and you get zinc, and then you get lead. And then when you're distal, that's when you get the manganese carbonates, which is mostly rhodochrosite, that beautiful Butte pink rhodochrosite that we know. And so I basically put the Philipsburg district kind of on the same format here. And so again, the porphyry system is way up there. The little difference with the porphyry, it has been drilled by a couple of holes, maybe a dozen, in the 60s and 80s. And they drilled mostly the skarn that's around the outcrops. And they found mostly moly, a little bit of copper, but really mostly moly porphyry. And so as you go away from that porphyry, you get on Hope Hill a lot of silver, copper. And then as you go a little south, that's where Tower, the town of Tower is you get zinc. And then as you go toward granite bimetallic, that's where you get a lot of lead and then the manganese carbonates, a lot of pink rhodochrosite that basically looks just like Butte. I'll talk about that later. Okay, so I just wanted to show you rocks because we're geologists, so let's look at rocks. So copper, moly, porphyry up there, really looking good. I haven't done many analysis on that yet. It does outcrop in 2 locations, so I'm calling this one the Red Hill because that's the Red Hill. And then this is the Steroid Gulch, so this is the Steroid Gulch porphyry. I have no idea if they are connected yet. That is something that I intend on looking for. But yeah, pretty big skarn around them. The soil is bright red, so you can really map the extent of that skarn, at least at the surface, based on the color of the soil. Then you go to Hope Hill. That's where they started mining. When they started mining there, they did the washout process because it was so low, if not at all, in sulfides that the washout process from Washoe, Nevada, was working really well there. And so you see lots of copper and then lots of quartz. The manganese oxide is, of course, throughout the whole district, but a lot of that in Hope Hill, and then a lot of silver. I didn't find visible silver yet, but let's see, maybe one day. As you pass into the hill just south of it, that's where you get your sulfides. And as a matter of fact, the little story is it's called Pullman Hill because it basically broke the mill because they were feeding sulfides to the washout process, which is an amalgamation process. Doesn't really work well, and so they barely recovered anything for a couple of years until they figured it out, and they had to put together a modified process. And so they called that hill Pullman Hill because that pretty much broke the mill. But that's when we get a lot of zinc, lots of pyrite too, a little bit of rhodochrosite, but it's not, as you can see, it's not that obvious. I have galena here, but really not that much, not that much lead, really zinc. And then an interesting occurrence in this area is we have realgar at that place, which is pretty rare in Montana. Then going south, that's where we're really in kind of the hot spot in terms of the vein zonation. That's because we're going to get a lot of tennantite, energite, and low iron sphalerite, and this is a typical assemblage for high sulfidation minerals, which is really, it's interesting when you're in a porphyry load system. And then as a matter of fact, this sphalerite is low iron enough that it displays incredible fluorescence color under long wave UV lamp. And so I looked at that. Well, somebody found it. I didn't. I can't take credit for this. But I am actually looking at what element in the sphalerite creates those color variation. All of that is sphalerite. All of it. So I have a slide on that to show you why. And then going down, we are in granite bimetallic, and that's where we're really going to get a lot more lead in there. And then also in terms of mineral assemblage, it is notable that we have high iron sphalerite, tetrahedrite, and arsenopyrite. And again, if you look at, instead of just, if you look at vein zonation around a porphyry, granite bimetallic is typical of low sulfidation assemblage, and this is going well according to NOD and all vein zonation around a porphyry. So looking at some potential of Philipsburg, I did some analysis with the USGS, and I have to show a disclaimer that the data that I got are preliminary, and the government, the USGS, is not to be liable for any of it. But let's go back to the sphalerite that is from Tower. And so I mentioned that the particularity with this sphalerite is that it's very low iron, and that we think that's what allow those the fluorescence to be activated. So we sent 12 samples. 4 of them were thick section. The rest of them were epoxy mount. And then we did LAI CPMS on them. And we got very interesting things just because we were trying to explain the colors. we actually ended up finding a lot of gallium, up to almost 5,000 ppm of gallium. And here I am talking about inside the sphalerite lattice, not as inclusions. I was very careful to remove any signs of inclusions. So those are within the sphalerite crystal. A fair amount of germanium, indium, and those are fairly common, as a matter of fact, in sphalerite. This is not a surprise. But I found tungsten, which has never been documented in the sphalerite lattice yet. Fair amount of tungsten, up to 3,000 ppm, almost 3,000 ppm. And then a lot of silver inside the sphalerite lattice, which is pretty interesting. Of course, a lot of other things, but those are basically the economically potential from the USGS critical element list, basically. So the interpretation with these elements is that there are some substitution going on. So anybody that has, well, any element that has 2 valence, which is basically what zinc has, can just substitute simply. But if they have a valence that is not 2+, then they're going to have to do couple substitution so that they can substitute for a zinc 2+. And then the last one, which that's the one that is really not found in literature, and we really need to make sure that's the valence that is indeed there, is the tungsten, which is 6+, which would copper substitute with which would couple substitute with copper to replace zinc. Okay. So that's the heat of my research right now. That's what I'm doing. So the other very interesting potential of the Philipsburg district is the porphyry. It outcrops in 2 very small places, but when we look at copper moly showings throughout the district, we find something very interesting. There are some copper tungsten and copper moly basically on the north and hugging the side of the district. And if you're familiar with porphyry systems, when you're copper, moly, and tungsten, you're generally into a proximal zone. And so what I'm thinking might be going on is that the porphyry, instead of being a blob like we usually think of, it might be tabular, and it might dive and being concealed under the strat column on the west side of the district. And so my intention is to convince some people, some geophysicists, I'm not geophysicist, to come help me, and we're going to do a little bit of geophysics to see if we could maybe find something there, like not too far, and maybe down there as well. And so do a couple of lines with geophysics and see what's happening there. Very simple interpretative cross-section on what that porphyry could be is that's where it outcrops on the north side of the district, and then it might get concealed. I don't know if it's cut or if it's a one single body. It might also come back closer to the surface, could be explaining why we have that high sulfidation zone in the middle of the district, or the moly copper showings at the south. So in conclusion, Philipsburg was the second richest polymetallic district in Montana, but it was really never been studied with modern methods. Butte stole all the spotlight, so yep. But it appears, based on those preliminary data, it appears that Philipsburg belongs to the Cordilleran polymetallic lode deposit type, which is also called Butte type, convenient. And then it really shares a lot of similarities with Butte deposit. And I mentioned a few, but I also, so the ages of the intrusives, the zonation of the lodes, the fact that it was mined for manganese, the same type of alkaline igneous rocks nearby, a porphyry plus a main stage event, basically, and then a lot of energite, chalcocite in Butte, but tennantite in Philipsburg, which are both very copper-rich. Another thing that I didn't put here, but I also started diving into isotopes, fluid inclusions, and it also shows similarity there as well. And it has very interesting potentials. It seems like it has very interesting critical minerals, especially in the sphalerite. So this summer, I'm going to give a few samples to our metallurgy department, and we're going to try flotation and maybe roasting and leaching on them and see what we can recover. And then potentially a concealed porphyry that have really never been looked for, as far as I know. So if you've looked for it, I would like to talk to you. Here are my quick reference, and I'm gonna say thank you with that beautiful video of our sphalerite that shows incredible fluorescence, but also phosphorescence, and that's basically when I turn off the light, it keeps glowing. Voilà.
Thanks, Celine. Questions?
Yes.
The cross-section figure is showing a regional waterfall.
Yeah.
Philipsburg batholith and your study area. Is that observed fault? I mean, is that a mapped fault?
In the cross section?
Yeah. Looked like there was
A fault? No, that's really the side of the batholith.
oh.
Yeah, I made it flat because, you know, PowerPoint. That being said, there is the Philipsburg thrust, slightly on the west side of town. And I've been looking at, you know, Kalake and Neighbert. Those guys have interesting theories on how those igneous rock would go onto the thrust ramp and basically settle in the thrust fold. So it could be related to a thrust, but I don't know which one.
Any more questions?
You might be able to answer this better next year, but if 5,000 parts per million gallium, is that a potentially recoverable resource if the sphalerite is being processed already?
So probably, and there are some occurrences in the world where they are mining for zinc, but they are recovering gallium, indium as a side product. So it is doable.
But you did not see any specific gallium minerals?
No, it's really in the sphalerite lattice as an atom. Mm-hmm.
Great. More questions? All right.
In the back.
Oh.
I've got to ask you a big picture question. You may be aware that some years ago, a couple of professors at the University of Montana published a paper that got a lot of attention, Heinemann and Talbot, about the relation of the Boulder batholith and the Philipsburg batholith and the successive batholiths between the Boulder and the Idaho batholiths were all related, that there was potentially destabilization as the Idaho batholith was in place, a series of very deep thrusts occurred, and that these batholiths in between were a product of that, and that perhaps you could see the variation in the mineralization as a result of that travel distance. And I'm curious your thoughts on any of that.
Well, there's not that much variation of mineralization between the Butte district and the Philipsburg district, other than the Philipsburg district is much smaller. It's about 1/5, as far as I can tell. But do you mean the mineralization within the batholith?
No, from batholith to batholith.
From batholith to batholith. I'm not really focusing on the batholith, so I don't really have an opinion on that. But I mean, I've read that paper. I know the paper you're mentioning, and yeah, I mean, there are definitely some thrust faults in the area. They could all be connected. They are not dated the same way. Like the batholith that is closer to Geology is a little older. No, younger, actually. Sorry. So I don't know. There might be some age conflicts there.
All right, great. Thank you, Celine.
Yeah, thank you.